Here we are. Welcome to Junkyard Theory, folks. And today's guest is somebody who's working on a very specific TV series at the moment. He's in Madrid shooting the second season, which I'm totally hyped up for. He's done quite a lot of work on television, and one movie that I kind of grew up watching, a Wesley Snipes movie. And he's a director, screenwriter, producer, and a showrunner. So this is the very first time we're having a producer on board the show. So help me welcome Mr. Simon Barry. Simon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Akash. It's nice to be here, and it's my pleasure.
Simon, could you, let's start off with how you entered the industry. Like, how did you get into filmmaking?
Sure. I started very young. I was always into movies as a kid, and the way films were made. I was always curious about the production of how special effects and monster effects and horror films did the technical aspect. So I was very interested in making films, and so as a kid, I used to make Super 8 films and films with my friends just for fun. And we did animation, we did live action, we would do all kinds of experiments using blowing up toys with firecrackers and filming it in slow motion to see what it would look like. And then I realized that I could go to school, for film studies. So I went to the University of British Columbia in Vancouver to go to film school. And while I was there, I started also working in the Vancouver film industry as a technician, first as a PA, as an assistant, and then later as a camera assistant, second assistant, and a first assistant camera. And so that got me much closer to the action, obviously, and working on professional film sets and with top directors and cinematographers and actors. And it made me realize that I loved being in the film industry, but I didn't want to be a cameraman, which was where I was working. So, but I loved camera, but I really had an interest in writing and directing. So I decided to quit the industry as a camera assistant, and I moved to Los Angeles to try screenwriting. And that sort of started a whole new direction for me. And so I started writing, and very quickly I was lucky to get a sale of a script. One of my first scripts got me an agent, and I got also I was able to get a work permit and stay in the United States, so I could continue developing my career. And I started working quite a bit in the studio system, working for Warner Brothers mostly, which is what led to working on movies like The Art of War and a few other jobs I worked on where I was helping develop stories into scripts, and most of them didn't get made, but I got to connect with a lot of producers and in Hollywood. And then I started moving into television, and I worked in TV for quite a while, then working for CBS and USA Network. And then eventually my first TV show, Continuum, got it to production, and that actually coincided also with me moving back to Vancouver because we filmed it in Vancouver. So I decided to basically make my move back to Canada, and I worked on Continuum for 4 years, almost 5 years really. And then and that just led to the next and the next and the next opportunity. So Van Helsing followed shortly, Bad Blood, Ghost Wars, and then Warion.
Quite a journey, and you started out writing. Could you talk to me a little bit about the process of writing for television versus writing a feature film? I mean, these are two completely different tasks. There are similarities, but how that process, like how do you tackle that process?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of overlap. I mean, obviously, every movies and TV are similar in that they are made up of scene structure, and they also are dependent on character in a big way. And so the lessons I learned when I started writing movies, as it related to things like the fundamentals of storytelling and developing character. In some ways, film writing trains you to you have to be very efficient, very fast in sort of setting up your story, setting up your characters. And that was a skill that I could use in writing pilots to great effect, because a pilot needs to be a very fast introduction into your television story. And also the design of a pilot oftentimes is connected to the setup of the show. So unlike a feature with a television show, you obviously have to think long view. And a show isn't just the premise, it's usually the premise that launches you into meeting and understanding and falling in love with the characters, which then is what sustains the television story. So the main difference is that in television, you get to build groups of relationships and character dynamics that are designed to take a journey, and you don't look for closure, and you don't look for a defining, final moment like you would in a movie. You're really setting up active dynamics that are going to continue as long as possible. So in television, the discipline was to find ideas that would sustain these things, this model of finding characters that you wanted to see every week, again and again, and develop and hopefully, surprise and excite and entertain audiences in a way that can go a long time. And with Continuum, which was my first time really developing a character or characters that would be, taking a long journey, it was a great education in how to keep a show on its feet for 4 seasons, which, at the time, I wanted more, but I've realized since then that 4 seasons was very lucky, and so that was a very good training ground for me, having never really worked on that television show before that. At least I'd written pilots, but I hadn't written in the sense that a continuing story like this that went on for this many hours.
And Continuum, like being your first TV series, that wasn't a very easy subject or genre that you tackled. It was sci-fi and more specifically time travel. So yeah. Maintaining not just the continuity, but also the storyline, making sure you don't really have too many plot holes, all of that. It's pretty much a daunting task, and somehow you guys managed to pull it off really well. And I thought season 4 felt like the perfect ending. So could you talk to me a bit about Continuum, and more specifically like setting it apart from the time travel stories that kind of came before it?
Well, when you write a show like that, the writing room becomes incredibly important, because I couldn't possibly manage on my own the amount of logic holes and storylines and character journeys that were happening in the show like that. So it was really a challenge to, as you said, to keep the time travel rules and the mythology from getting out of control. And a lot of times the writers and I would have to check each other and criticize each other openly, because we wanted to make sure the show didn't deviate too far off of the rails. And once we knew we had a final season, it really became apparent that we had to focus really on character story and character journeys to close them. And we had obviously we had a big group of characters, but we also had our lead character, Kira, and really always had been, the essential component of the show's point of view for the most part. So having her journey come to a satisfying end was really our main goal, was to try and get her home in a way, get her back where she started, but also challenge the audience a little on what that meant, what her journey was about, and the price she had to pay. So we came up with this idea that she had, corrected the timeline in a way, but that the price of correcting it was that she could go home, but she couldn't be with her son, really, because there was another her in the new corrected timeline. And that was, we were also trying to adhere to our own rules. We had set up a model that we knew we had to change her future. And in order to change her future, she could not really be, a part of it in the same way. So that was our way of balancing an ending with a happy ending with also, a sort of, I guess you could say, an ending that felt like it was not easy. It was going to be a challenge, and something that would be thought-provoking and something that would be a little bit more dramatic than just a happy conclusion, I guess you could say. So that was sort of how we came to that point as a team.
What made it so special, I guess, with that ending was that there were real stakes at hand, and it's not really, like you said, it is kind of a happy ending, but she doesn't really get the ending that she wanted. So
yeah,
supporting the audience's expectations in a way. So
a little bit. I mean, you're always trying to take the audience on a journey that, on the one hand, they have an idea about what's going to happen, but you also need to surprise them so that everyone knows the journey is from A to B, but we don't have to take you on the straight road. We can take you on the side roads, and the side roads are much more interesting. And other things can happen on the side roads that won't happen on the highway. So for us, it was really, the show had always been, I think, working well when we took these detours from the main point and got to know the characters better. So this was really our continuing effort to try and make the characters' lives a little bit more complicated.
And when it comes to streaming versus, traditional TV, things have changed a little bit. Like, whereas you had the audience waiting a week to watch like the next episode, now you have the entire season being released. And what does that do to storytelling? Because back then you kind of needed to hold the audience for a week's time, but now you release everything together, and I guess the process is a little bit different.
Well, it starts in the writing room. I mean, you tend to think when we were making Continuum, which was on Sci-Fi every week, every Friday night, we understood that the audience could be asked to explore the show in terms of chapters and journey and mini stories that didn't have to be directly connected to each other, so that we could tell stories that were outside of the straight linear narrative of the story, and that we could use the week in between to reset a little bit the audience's expectations and take a more of a zigzag route, towards the conclusion of the season. With streaming and the way, for example, Netflix releases, because Disney is also streaming, but they release on a weekly pattern. I mean, with Netflix, we knew in the writing room that it was more like going to be a 10-hour movie in a way, that we were essentially, Netflix's objective was to make the viewer not want to wait to watch the next episode, that they would come to the end of an episode and have the desire to click watch it next. And that, so as writers, we knew that, and we were asked also by Netflix to try and create mechanisms within each story so that you felt that you had to keep watching to watch the story. And in a storytelling sense, you're writing a long single story in that sense, as opposed to 10 separate individual chapters that are standalone but connected. So it's a very different approach, but it really does start in the writing room, and it starts with the way the writers and I decide in advance how we want the story of the season to unfold. And it's in a much more direct, immediate way, much more similar to what you would do with a movie. It's, a 2-hour movie, except you expand that into 6, 8, 10, depending on, what the order is. So it does change, you know. I mean, you can build in certain things like flashbacks and side stories that are part of the narrative process when you can, which is nice. So you don't get stuck in a linear storytelling structure. And or you can do things like WandaVision, where you break out of the week-to-week expectations by resetting everything all the time, which works for something like that. I haven't really worked on a show yet that allowed for it to be completely reinventing, you know, the model. I'd like to someday, but the idea with Warrior Nun was we had a very, very specific setup with Ava's story that required a continuation in the sense of storytelling, because it was sort of an immediate situation. She's brought back from the dead. She has this weapon, magical object, you know, religious object in her, and she needs to deal with it right away. It's not something where she can sort of stop and go on a holiday, you know, and we can have an episode, a Christmas episode, or, you know, it doesn't work that way. So these shows tend to define themselves based on what the premise is. And if the premise decides, well, this is a story that needs momentum, it needs a continuous journey that is not broken up, then you approach it that way as writers, and you realize that that's something you need to use, because there is tension, there is, you know, a ticking clock, there is something that is putting pressure on your character to deal with, so that you use that as a way to also increase dramatic stakes. And that's what we were dealing with Warrior Nun. That was very much baked in, as they say, into the concept.
How do you guys decide when to end like a specific episode? Because like you said, you guys you're writing one complete storyline, and streaming definitely facilitates you know, that storytelling system, but you still gotta keep the audience binging. I mean, that is like what Netflix expects. So.
It's actually fairly straightforward. I mean, with most rooms, you really are drawing a map of your season based on your characters' journeys, and it's tiered based on who is the most, you know, which character has the most impact on the story, and whose point of view is the audience really following. So the journey, for example, Ava in season 1. We knew the premise, obviously, of the setup of the show in advance, because that was part of what Netflix had bought into. But we didn't have an exact idea of the journey that would take her towards the ending. But we knew that Ava was the key storyteller in terms of point of view. So we, as writers, essentially talked about the ups and downs that we wanted to see for Ava's character based on who she was, where she'd come from, where she was going, and how she was I guess you could say, a catalyst in someone else's world. She's not a nun, she's not religious, she's not part of this order, and so she becomes something foreign that has been placed into this environment. And so we realized that this was really something that we needed to service from her as a person. Before we thought about story points, we just wanted to have her take an emotional character journey with lessons, with mistakes, with victories, with lots of different turns that would be crucial to her growing up as a character, to her growth. And after we understood where that was going to lead us, then we would go back and add story ideas that would allow these emotional character moments to be serviced and exploited. And so we end up marrying the character journey with the story journey, almost like a map on a wall. You know, we create a big wall with 10 episodes in a line, and we have Ava over here, and we draw a map of her for character, and we draw a map of her for story. And then we try and marry those two into the 10 hours we are given, and they form natural shapes, because, you know, there are, even though it is one continuous story, you do have mini chapters within the story, and those stories can have beginnings and middles and ends within the hour. And some of them we spread out over 2 hours so that you can, you say, well, we need more than 1 hour to tell this story, so we're going to break it up into two episodes. And so then you start to look at the story that you've come up with and how that story can, on the one hand, end at the end of the hour in a way, but also set up more for the larger story of the show that continues. So in the case of, for example, Warrior Nun in season 1, in some cases we would conclude a story in a way that was part of that episode's storyline, but make sure that we were also servicing the larger storyline of the season so that we could include both parts into the episode. And that way you could end one storyline with Ava having accomplished something or figuring something out. And we could also run the continuing storyline of Warrior Nun in there as well, so that you felt like, oh, I want to know more about that part of the story as well. And we would find a moment to end the episode on that felt like it was satisfying. You could stop watching and have dinner or do something else and come back. Or if you were so inclined, you would go, oh, I want to see more about this, and keep watching. So it is something that that becomes really self-evident once you start breaking the story out. Because you're constantly doing both. You're constantly doing the character story and the mythology story, as we call it.
That's really interesting. I'm curious what the pitch for Warion was like. Like, how did this arrive at Netflix? Did you guys go there, or were you called into the project? How did this come about?
It's funny. Well, I originally encountered Warrior Nun several years before Netflix picked it up, but it was a movie at the time. So I knew the producer of the movie. He was trying to get the movie made. He had developed a script, but it was quite problematic in terms of trying to fit all of the mythology of Warrior Nun into 90 minutes. And the story was quite complicated, and it had several issues, and he knew it was problematic. So he came to me to rewrite it as a movie. And so I started rewriting it at a point, and I realized that it wasn't going to, I couldn't fix really what he had handed to me. I sort of had to start again. And at the same time, I realized that there was too much for a movie to make the story satisfying. And so I asked him if he thought, it would be, if he was okay, because he was really intent on doing a feature film, and he had people already interested in doing it as a feature film. And I said, well, what if you saw this as a TV show? How would you feel about that? And he said, well, I would be interested, but I don't know, and I said, okay, well, think about it. And so I didn't really do very much at that time. And I was working on another TV series at the time, so I didn't have a lot of time to focus on Warrior Nun. But I did have a meeting at Netflix where they'd asked me to come in to pitch my new ideas for a show. And I brought four ideas with me that I'd been working on over the years. And I pitched them. They were all fairly complete. I'd figured out the pitch and how the season would go. So I had a lunch with one of the executives at Netflix, and I pitched him the four ideas that I brought. And at the end, he was like, I don't really like any of these. And I was like, oh, that's too bad. I mean, I'd worked really hard on these. And he said, well, do you have anything that's a little bit, crazy, a little bit out there? And I said, well, and then it popped into my head, but I hadn't really figured out Warrior Nun at that point. And I said, well, there's this one thing I've been working on as a feature, but I think it's going to be better as a TV show. And I pitched sort of the book, first of all, the original graphic novel by Ben Dunn, and sort of how I was thinking of turning it into a TV show. And he was like, oh, that sounds like something I would like to hear more about. And so I was like, okay. I said, well, give me a few days, because I didn't have really everything sorted out yet from the idea. And so I went home and I started writing a kind of a 20-page pitch document that would lay out the character, lay out the plot of the pilot, and lay out, several other things that were aimed, because again, as a TV show, it's not enough to have just the premise. You need to have an array of characters that all take a journey that can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what have you. So I had to crack the code of how that was going to work, the chemistry set of the show, and knowing that it would be a long journey, not a short journey. The movie was a very short journey. The TV show had to be something completely different in a way. And so I worked on that and then presented that document to Netflix, and also a book of concept art that had been produced by my friend, the producer of the movie. He had done this really, really beautiful book that was kind of not very literal in terms of the story of Warrior Nun, but had like iconic images that were inspired from the graphic novel and that were inspired by the movie that was never made. And so I sent both of those to Netflix, the pitch and the book. And that seemed to help people get excited about the idea. And fairly shortly after that, the executive called me and said, I think we want to make the show, here. And I said, what you mean you want me to write it? And he said, no, we want you to go into production. And I was like, well, we have to write scripts. We have to do it all. We have to figure it out. So we started putting together a budget right away. And of course, that led to a schedule for production and scripts writing. And so unlike a lot of shows, I didn't really write the pilot until we were in the writing room. Usually you write the pilot first, then they say, okay, let's go. And then the writing room becomes part of the extension of the pilot. In this case, they said, no, let's just go straight into production as fast as we can. Don't write the pilot now, go into the writing room, figure out the rest of the season, and then you can write the pilot as part of the writing room process. So, which was very unusual, but I actually thought it was great because we got to figure out more about what the show was about in that moment. And so the pilot really was informed by the rest of the work that we had done figuring out season 1. And so that was a very helpful exercise. So that's really the short answer. It's not a very short answer, I guess. It's kind of a long answer. But I think it was the kind of title and idea that quickly could be distilled. And I think Netflix liked that it was a bit audacious, a bit different, and a bit crazy.
The moment I heard that Warion was being turned into a TV series, I was like, how the hell are these guys going to do it?
Yeah, well, if you know the book, I mean, the books are very, very different in terms of tone and the visuals and sort of the setting. But there were things in the book that were fundamental in terms of just the concept of why the Warrior Nuns existed. Some of the character archetypes, like Shakan Mary and Lilith and Mother Superior, were solid ground to build off of. And the idea of bringing an outsider into the OCS for us was really the way to make it accessible to the audience, because the book is very dense and is a huge mythology, and it's great for that, but it's hard for a newcomer to sort of go, oh, I know what's going on. They have to really be walked in a way with someone. And so Ava for us became that person who could lead the audience in a journey of discovery of what this order was and what's happening, and not be buried in a massive amount of information that would have been, I think, too much too fast.
And what does a normal pitch look like for, like, let's say, a TV show? If you are pitching to cable versus something like Netflix, what does it kind of?
I don't think they look exactly the same. I mean, at the end of the day, what the show is defines how you pitch it. So you don't change the pitch, really. The process of pitching is really doing a ton of homework. For me, the idea is I should be able to go into the room, pitch the pilot in a way that I get to establish what the premise of the show is. What's the show about? What's the pilot doing? The first episode, how is it setting up the show. Who are the characters? Very, most importantly, who are the characters? What is their journey? What are the themes of the show? How do the characters' journeys reflect what the show is about? And then that's the first half. The second half is I need to know a good idea of what happens in the first season, how that first season ends, how that first season's ending sets up season 2, so that there is a continuity of storytelling. I'm not setting up something that's closed, ended at the end. I'm setting up something that is designed to, continue. And I need to be able to answer a lot of questions. Usually the meeting goes for an hour. The pitch part is usually over in 20 minutes. That means 40 minutes of questions. And so you basically become an expert on a show that's never been made, but you have to be an expert on it as if it had been made. So you've made the show in your head. You know who all the characters are. You know where they're going, not episode by episode by episode, but in at the 40,000 foot level, and you have an understanding of who these people are and why would anybody want to watch. Who are these people and why do I care? That's what I'm always trying to ask.
Gotcha.
And so in the pitch meeting, that's what the buyers usually want to know too. They're like, who are these people and why do I care? Because for them, they're representing the audience when they hear these pitches, and they know their audiences very well. So if you tell them something that they feel like the audience, they may like it, but if they're like, well, the audience is going to be confused, or the audience won't know what's happening, or the audience doesn't care about these themes, you have to listen to them because that's their job. Their job is to know the audience. My job is to pitch, a compelling and interesting character and story that I think their audience will like, but they ultimately will be the judge of that. So you play to the strengths of what the network is already doing, and also to what you want to do, because as a showrunner and as a show creator, I think they want me to be also the person that's the most excited, the most enthusiastic, and the most connected in a way to what the show is about, on a level that is going to keep the show moving, and because they're making hundreds of shows, so they're not really focusing on Warrior Nun. I'm focusing on Warrior Nun, and it's the only show I'm making right now. So they want me to be that person for the show, that someone who's going to be looking after it, taking care of it. And to do that, you have to really get into the idea of what it is and why you're making it, and who the characters are, and what the stories are about.
So do you also create something like a pitch Bible, or I think it's a TV series Bible? Do you bring that to the pitch meeting itself, or is that created before?
No, the Bible is usually a function of what happens in the writing room. So what we'll do is the Bible becomes the collection of the ideas as we write the show. So that if in season 2 new writers or new directors come into the show, they have a document they can look at that is distilling a lot of the important parts of the show. It's hard to write a full show Bible before you've pitched the show, because really the emphasis of a pitch is like, how do I grab you quickly into a story with great characters that have an amazing, exciting journey ahead of them. If I get bogged down in the details of a show Bible, which are very detailed and very, I'll bore you to death, and there won't be enough time to get into that kind of detail. So the Bible is something, in my view, that comes later. But a pitch document should be very detailed in the sense that you need to have, I think your pilot concept has to be fully fleshed out and awesome. Your season arc, to a degree, needs to be well thought out and awesome, and your character descriptions and your conversations about tone, visuals, and theme have to be extraordinarily well thought out, to a point where everything works together and it becomes the perfect collage at a pitch level, where everyone can see how everything connects to everything else, and that everything is there for a reason. And entertaining, or whatever, however that's defined. If it's a comedy, it should be funny. If it's horror, it should be scary. If it's dramatic, if it's drama, it should be dramatic and surprising. And and with fantasy or science fiction, it's why are you telling the story as it relates to the real world? How does your story in a fantasy setting affect a viewer that isn't living in a fantasy world or a science fiction world? What's the relevant themes that they are going to be interested in, and how is that going to make them stay a viewer, remain loyal, and and be entertained at the end of the day, get their money's worth, for their $15 a month or whatever they're paying.
As a showrunner, what do you focus on the most, like with a series like that goes on for multiple years? What's your main concern?
Well, it's always the story and the characters for me. Just every day, whether I'm in production, writing room, or the post-production, I'm making sure that the character journey is consistent and that it is honest and truthful to what we've set out to do. So for me, showrunning is it's like being a conductor, sometimes at an orchestra, because I've made the decision that we're going to do this symphony, and this is the way I want it interpreted and how I want all the musicians to play their parts in the symphony, and I've arranged it, in my own way, but I'm not playing any instruments myself, and I'm not in the audience, and I'm not selling tickets, and I'm not doing the lighting, and I'm not doing anything else. I'm really just making sure that everyone's focus is in the right direction. Everyone is thinking in the same, that we're making the same show or playing the same piece of music, and everything has to work together so that music sounds the way I want it to sound, or the way the composer intended it to be heard. And so that's a lot of what I do every day, is communicating to writers, directors, actors, the key heads of departments who are making the show, physically making the show, art department, and special effects, visual effects, stunts, the makeup and hair, wardrobe, the lighting, camera, grip teams, transportation, even, and production, from a point of view of just the practical approach to making the show, what's best from a pragmatic point of view. So just trying to communicate what's important here, what in their job. They have very busy jobs. They have tons of things to think about. I'm just there to remind them what's important from the audience's point of view. The audience needs this, let's make sure that's a priority. But I don't try to do their jobs. They're very good at what they do. And then into post-production with sound, with editors, with visual effects, and color timing. All of it is designed to enhance the writing and the storytelling and the key elements of what the show is about. So I'm just tweaking and shifting and adjusting little things all the time, so that the main thrust of what we're doing is always kind of coming through, and the audience is getting that clear and in a surprising, interesting, unexpected way, usually, if I can, and making sure that the quality is as high as it can be, with the budget that we have and the time that we have, really pressing everyone to deliver the highest quality that we can within the box that we've been given.
How do you hire the people to work on a project like this? How do you pick the writers, the directors? Because it's not one person, it's multiple people within a TV show. How does that happen?
Well, it's a combination of things usually. I mean, a lot of times it will be people either I have worked with before in some cases, or it's people that have been recommended to me by people I've worked with before. So for example, with Warrior Nun, with all the shows before Warrior Nun, I had worked with many of the writers multiple times. So from Continuum days even. So I was with the writing staff of my Canadian shows. It had been sort of repeating, and trying to find some new names, but really playing it safe, I guess you could say. With Warrior Nun, the writing room was in LA. I didn't know any of the writers really that I was working with, except for one, which was Amy Berg, who I had a social relationship with. I didn't know her. I hadn't worked with her, but I knew her socially. So I asked her if she would, at first I asked her, thinking that she wouldn't be available, if she could recommend some writers. And then I found out she was available, so I hired her. So I had someone I knew because I didn't know anyone else. And then we rounded out the room with a combination of people she suggested, people that Netflix suggested, and then some sort of, I guess you could call it the typical talent search part of it, which is sometimes agents they hear about the show and they submit writers, and you read them and you go, oh, here's a really talented person. Let's give them a shot. And so it was really on Warrior Nun. It was like that. And then the directors fairly state the same kind of discovery process mixed with recommendations. So Netflix obviously is very involved in all the key hires. And so what I do is I try and create a list of people that I think are interesting, and then they also will offer me a list of people they think are interesting. And so we sometimes combine those lists, and in some cases it's people I know, like for example, on season 1 of Warrior Nun, Matthias Herndl was someone I had worked with before as a director. And I was lobbying for him. So, and then with Jet, who directed the first 2 episodes, that was someone who I knew of through my agency. And they had been helping me track down a pilot director. So Jet was someone that was on my radar because we have the same agent. And then some of the other directors were from Netflix's list, and it was sort of a combination, really. And then I directed the last 2, so that was the the easiest one to figure out, just because it was me. But and then the heads of department. I mean, with a show that shoots outside of the country in Spain, it's really important to find a partner in that country who understands who the best people are. And so when we knew we were going to come and shoot in Spain, we went after this company Fresco, which was the service company for Game of Thrones in Spain. And it was important that obviously they had exceptionally good taste. I mean, we didn't have a Game of Thrones budget by any means, but they obviously understood that we're all trying to find people who are exceptionally talented and exceptionally good at their jobs and the best available. And so Fresco became our partner in finding a lot of our key creative personnel in Spain, which is most of our crew. I mean, 95% of the crew is Spanish, and the heads of department are all Spanish except for one of our DPs. So we really got a lucky break that Fresco came on as our Spanish service company, because they had these great connections with people like Barbara Perez Solero, who's our designer, and Cristina Pena, who does our costumes, Tate Iranez, who is our location manager in season 1, and Diana Sagrista, who does our sound, and I mean, Pau, Kuko, it's an incredible team of people who've done incredibly big movies and big TV shows, and brought all of their knowledge and their talent, and all very nice people too. That was the other important thing, is you just want people who are nice to work with, because you're with them every day for 6 months. So you want people that you look forward to going to work with. That's another part of it. So Peter Welter, who was our Spanish line producer in season 1, and his company is our service company. He found essentially the best people in Spain, and that was really helpful for us, to keep Warrior Nun looking as good as it does, and from a point of view of all the things that you see on the screen, and the management, and the smooth running of a company. Essentially what we're doing is setting up a big company for 6 months and then shutting it down. And so you want the company to be well run as well. You don't want money being wasted and things falling through the cracks, like any company,
Yeah. So it's essentially an LLC, is it, or? Yeah,
the film company appears and disappears for the process of making the show, but
Gotcha.
and then for season 2 you kind of create a second season company, and because you don't know you're getting a season 2, so you once you find out, by the time you've got season 2, the company you've created for season 1, sometimes it's already been closed down, or I don't know. I mean, it's just part of the way things are done.
I think the hires were done really well, because taking a look at some of the movies that come out of Spain, it's insane what these guys do. So yeah. At the same time, pitching something over to Netflix, it's one of the most, I guess, one of the busiest studios in the world, right next to Disney, I guess. So this is it's hardly a transparent process. And so many people I see arguing on forums about how it's done, but there's no clear-cut answer. Does this run on connections as well, or does somebody who has no prior connections to the industry, is there a way that they can pitch something over to them? Too?
Well, Netflix is very good about doing outreach to new talent. I would say they're one of the best companies in the world to find ways to discover and bring in underrepresented talent, underrepresented writers, international talent, as you know. And so for me, my experience with Netflix was primarily built on pre-existing relationships with people I'd worked with at other companies who ended up working at Netflix later. And I was that because I had started my career before Netflix existed in the shape it is now. I wasn't really I couldn't take advantage of their, the programs they have now, which is, for example, in Canada, in my home country, Netflix is sponsoring programs to help discover new writing talent, new filmmaking talent within the already existing systems in Canada that are like certain kinds of schools and contests and programs that are designed to find new talent. So Netflix is very much involved in that, and they offer pitching opportunities. They offer informative kind of dialogue with executives, but it's all organized usually through an existing established framework, like in Vancouver, the Pacific Screenwriting Program, or in Toronto, it would be the Canadian kind of Film Institute. And so what they do is they rely on kind of existing Canadian structures that are already set up to find new talent. And they either sponsor them or just try to integrate in a way and find out who these people are. That's how it works in Canada. Every country that Netflix is in, I think they're trying to do this so that they can find the voices. For example, in Sri Lanka, if at some point they want to have a Sri Lankan television show made for Sri Lankans, the journey to do that will require them to find those voices, right? And so what's happened in France, what's happened in mainland Europe, what's happening in other countries where Netflix now wants to make the #1 show in Germany or France or Spain that's made in Spanish and German and French, they need to connect with the local community of filmmakers in order to find those voices and to find those people, because they don't just want to make English shows for the world. They want to make the best local language shows in every country they operate in. And the only way to do that is to find the talent, So either you have an established career that you can leverage through your work that you've already done, like I can, or you're part of the new crop of talent that they are looking for, and you just have to be discovered really by them somehow, which is usually means you have to write or make films yourself to a point where that is now accessible to everyone with an iPhone. Anyone can write a script, anyone. Doesn't require money, it doesn't require anything. You need a pad of paper. You can write a short film. And an iPhone, you can film it and edit it and sound mix it, compose the music, and actually distribute it. So if you can rise above the noise of everyone else who's doing that, there's a good chance someone like Netflix will recognize that and see it. But the key is to keep doing it. You can't stop. You can't put all your eggs into one basket. I learned even just with my first show, Continuum, it took me, I had to write 15, 16 unproduced TV pilots before Continuum. I had to write a few unproduced movies before Art of War. You learn by never giving up. You don't really learn by doing one thing and then waiting. You are constantly going and you never stop. And I'm working harder now on new ideas than when before I was a showrunner. I mean, it should be the other way around, right? I should be able to rest, but actually I'm more encouraged, more hungry now than I was then. So it never really ends, the pursuit. And the reason is because it's always the project that gets you excited. So for me, there's always a new project, there's always a new idea. And that's why I get up every morning and go to work. It's the excitement of that idea.
something that we tell the students through Junkyard Theory, like we have these courses as well, is that, you know, you got to continuously keep working on your craft every single day, and you got to bring your A game, like bring your 110% in every day. Because something I noticed while I was in LA is that everyone brings in at least 110%. Because if they don't, there's somebody else waiting in line to replace them.
Yeah, it's incredibly
really
competitive, and people are very talented. You know, there's a lot of really talented people out there who are not getting their chances, you know, as they probably deserve. So you have to constantly be improving. You have to constantly be adapting and learning so that you are competing at least as well as they are, because they're working hard.
True. How do you think the pandemic has kind of changed the consumption of content? I mean, Warion came out during the pandemic itself, and things have changed, like the landscape, and people are still, you know, I guess studios are still trying to draw in crowds with vaccinations going up, and like it's making a comeback. But I think the landscape is permanently changed to a certain degree. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my honest answer is I don't think about this very often. Because it doesn't really change what I do. I started my career in the 90s, and now it's 2021. I'm still doing essentially the same thing I did in the 90s, which was trying to come up with great characters and great stories and disseminate and execute them. I can't really worry too much about these models of distribution and changing patterns, and because it's like, I am only doing this. I'm not really, the way I shoot or direct or showrun or write, it won't really affect the distribution model very much, I think, unless, but it does, obviously, the tastes change. And certainly a show like Warion, I probably could never have gotten off the ground 20 years ago. And that's just because the audience keeps shifting. So as long as I'm kind of listening to the audience and getting excited by ideas and characters, I'm kind of just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm not really going to adapt based on pandemics or theaters being open or closed or streaming models or anything like that. I read about it as a curiosity, but it never enters my mind when I'm on set or writing or in the writing room or in the post-production. I never think about it. I just go, this is a great story with great characters, or it's not. And that's all I have really to keep. That's my guiding principle. It's like, is this going to be good or is this going to be shit? And I'm basically responsible for that. And so how can I worry about anything else? I can't. It's out of my control.
True. What about current affairs? I know this is a bit of a tricky question in a way, because
current affairs is it's always infecting what you're doing. Always. It's hard to avoid. I mean, everyone, especially in a writing room, you can imagine a writing room is a community, and we tend to work together for over 20 weeks, and whatever's happening in the world always has an impact on the conversation, on the themes, on the subtle subtext of things that are happening in the world. So if there's anything that is on people's minds, is it affects their lives, it'll definitely come into play in a way in the storytelling, sometimes in a direct way. I mean, obviously, lots of people during the pandemic wrote pandemic stories. That's a function of that. And so that's always going to happen. And also in hindsight, you know, you look back on your shows, like I look back on Continuum, and I think about, oh yeah, I remember the things like, you know, surveillance state stories and politics and social media and social responsibilities played a big role in our developing story ideas, because they were these new concepts then in 2010, 2011, 2012. The idea of some of our themes that we could plug into a time travel show was driven a lot by what was going on in the news. And that was fun because the show could do that. It was that kind of show. On Warion, we're sort of dealing with it's a larger mythology that's good and evil, heaven and hell, the nature of religion, the nature of Catholicism as it relates to their mythical past, their mythical structures. So we can talk about the Catholic Church in some modern terms, in terms of the politics, but we don't want the show to be about that. We want the show to be about the fantasy element. We use the Catholic Church as really a familiar structure that people know. I don't have to explain what the Vatican is. I don't have to explain what the Pope is. Jesus, the devil, God, demons, angels. This is all in the public consciousness. So it just makes my job as a mythology, as someone who's using a mythology, much easier. And so that's it. But the politics of modern day, I think socially on Warrior Nun, we think about, because it's a feminist show and about female empowerment and about sisterhood, we are aware of what's going on in the world, of course, as it relates to that. But we're also trying to focus on our characters in a way that we're not selling anything specifically that's going on. We may comment on the patriarchy every now and then, but we're not making the show about it. It's just part of the universe. It's part of our environment, but it's not why we're driving towards our storytelling goals or why our characters are uniquely motivated. They are themselves. They are all individuals, regardless of what era we're in. But of course, the reality of our world does, play a factor in terms of how people talk, how people think about their future, how people talk about what's right and wrong, these things. But it would have to really be a show that was about our modern world in the present, that would really, I think, lean into specifics for me. About, I like nuance and I like subtext, and I like the audience finding the things we're trying to talk about rather than be told what we're talking about. I like it when they go, oh, this storyline is similar to something like this in the real world, and I can make a connection to that personally without it being specific. And I think that's what we're always trying to do with our storytelling, is make it relevant without making it obvious.
True. Because when I watched Warion, that was something that struck me. Like, there was a very fine balance between like what you were addressing, like you said, elements like patriarchy, but the focus itself was on the storytelling, which is again what kind of makes it universally appealing. And at the same time, I can't remember the word, but it's something that people could connect to even like in 10 years' time.
Well, I hope so. I mean, it is. We designed it to be fun, not serious. I mean, it is. If no one who looks at the title Warrior Nun is thinking they're going to be getting a serious drama like The Crown. This is a show that in its title tells you what it is. It's a contradiction. It's two things that don't really belong together, and it's intriguing in a way that doesn't make sense. So we want the show to be, number one, a fun, entertaining show. But at the same time, we have characters who, in their minds, live in a real world that has ups and downs and problems and victories and failures. And so we have to give those characters true feelings and honest feelings about who they are. And oftentimes that involves relating them to real things, real concepts and real politics and real social issues. So we'll try to ground them always. We'll try to ground even a character like Adriel, who's a fantastical being that is undefinable in sort of normal terms on a TV show. But we still want to give him something to say that has relevance, not just to him, but to the world he's trying to have an impact on. And so, but the audience knows that Adriel is a creature of an imagination. He is not, he's not a historical figure. He's not someone who is, I mean, he's a historical figure in our show and in his own mind, but he's not, he's not designed to be someone that you look at and you go, oh, I should take this Adriel representative of something very specific and direct. He is a amalgamation of, a lot of things, but he can be observant. He can be he can editorialize, he can look at the world in a fresh way that sometimes some people will go, oh, I kind of agree with what he said because he's seeing it with a different perspective. And that's sometimes all you need.
Yeah.
It's the same with Ava. Ava is a conduit for the church for a fresh take on things. So she can be audacious and she can be challenging a very old established institutional way of behavior in a way that is fun. It's not that she knows she's not going to rewrite the way the Catholic Church operates, but she can affect the characters around her who have been set in their ways and have maybe a pattern of thinking that can be challenged and broken. And that's it.
It's brilliant. And since we are kind of the 1 hour mark and we got to wrap up, what advice would you give somebody who's starting out writing for television or streaming for that matter?
I would say if you're a writer, the more you write, the more chances you get at success and the better you get as a writer. So if you think of writing as a gambling, you get, for every script you write, you double your odds, of getting a break. You double your odds of someone reading your script and liking it. Your odds increase dramatically for every script that you write. So if you believe in odds, then the more you write, the more success. And the nice benefit of writing more and more is that you get better with every script. You learn so much about yourself, about the craft. So I would just say, write as much as you can all the time, and use it not as a tool that you like. It's not a lottery ticket. It's 100 lottery tickets if you want. And 100 lottery tickets is better than 1 lottery ticket by a factor of 100. So think about it in those terms. I mean, every script you write, every project you make, every short film you make is a new lottery ticket. And the nice thing is that each time you do it, the odds get better. So it's not like the first ticket is the same as the 100th ticket. The 100th ticket has a much better chance of succeeding because it's better than the first one. And you're better. And so it's just a journey and it never ends. Don't think you're going to ever stop. There's no one script. There's only the next script and the next script and the next script. And even when you've had success, at a certain point, that success is going to fade and you will need something new to build on. And so you can never stop. You can never sit back and go, I'm done. I have a career. No, you don't. Your career ends the day you made your first success. That's the end of the beginning and the end. So the next success is the only thing that keeps you going. So that's really what you're facing. And so in order to live with that, you have to love doing it. You have to love getting up, writing down story ideas, talking to your friends about stories, making short films, editing, writing movies, going to the movies, watching TV shows, watching movies, talking about TV shows. You have to love all of that because that's going to be your life anyway. You might as well enjoy it because there's no end, literally no end to it.
Yeah,
it's a snake that eats its own tail constantly.
It's a time loop.
and a time loop, apparently.
Yeah. Simon, you're in the middle of shooting the second season of Warion. Thank you so much
for... We're about to start shooting, yeah. We're in prep right now, but we start shooting very shortly, yeah. So
thank you so much for joining us on this session. We're really looking forward to season 2. Cannot wait till it comes out. And all the best.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm really excited to get it out. It's going to be a really good season, I think. We have some great stuff.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys left it off with such a cliffhanger. There is no way the audience is not going to wait for that. So yeah, all the best to you guys.
Thanks, Akash.
Thank you so much. And till the next time, this is Junkyard Theory, folks.